opens the door to many setups, controlling key central squares and aiming for queenside expansion. Embracing the king's Indian structure, black prepares to fianchetto the bishop, aiming for a flexible defense against white's flank opening. Developing the knight to a central square, preparing to contest the d5 pawn and potentially castle quickly. Unleashing the fianchettoed bishop establishes a powerful diagonal presence, eyeing white's queenside ambitions. Asserting central dominion, white aims to cramp black's development and sees an early positional advantage. Developing the knight to f6 establishes control over central squares and prepares for castling, a fundamental step in safeguarding the king. Asserting central dominance, this pawn thrust opens diagonal lines for piece development and prepares a broad queenside expansion. Solidifying the center and preparing for kingside castling, this defends the e5 square. Solidifying the kingside pawn structure, preventing future knight invasions while perhaps a touch slow. Securing the monarch behind a pawn shield provides immediate safety, freeing up pieces for central operations. Developing the bishop to e3 clears the diagonal for the queen and prepares for queenside expansion while bolstering central control. Challenging the center's central pawn structure now opens dynamic possibilities across the board. A bold stride forward, claiming central territory and restricting black's dark-squared bishop's diagonals. Challenging white's d-pawn dominance, this advance aims to undermine the central pawn chain and open lines on the queen side. Developing the knight to f3 solidifies the center's pawn chain and prepares for kingside castling, a prudent step in this complex king's Indian setup. Developing the knight to the rim here, while freeing the c-pawn, sacrifices a tempo and cedes central influence for potential queenside pressure. Shifting the knight to d2 prepares a kingside pawn push and solidifies the center's control. Developing the bishop to d7 reinforces the central pawn chain while preparing potential queenside expansion, a subtle but effective repositioning. Securing the kingside with solid development, white prepares to castle and connect the rooks. Black seeks to undermine white's central pawn chain and open lines for their pieces on the queenside. Aggressively pushing pawns toward black's kingside, this move initiates a sharp battle and opens new avenues for white's pieces. Unlocking the c-file creates immediate counterplay and challenges white's central grip. Reclaiming the central pawn strengthens white's space and prepares for queenside expansion. Exploring the queenside, black repositions the knight to a more active outpost, potentially challenging white's pawn chain. Pushing the h-pawn opens lines towards black's king, creating attacking potential on the kingside. Reclaiming central influence with the knight, black aims to challenge white's aggressive pawn structure and create new attacking avenues. Solidifying the queenside pawn structure aims to restrict black's knight maneuvering potential while seeking long-term control over the central expanse. Unleashing a pawn storm on the kingside, black aims to shatter white's central control and expose their monarch. Eliminating the knight opens the b-file, creating new attacking possibilities along that flank. Reclaiming the central pawn opens lines for your bishop, but it invites doubled pawns and a potentially exposed king. A risky pawn thrust that opens the kingside for potential attacks, but might leave white's king exposed. Opening the f-file grants a crucial pathway for your rook, potentially unsettling white's kingside pawn structure. Securing the king's safety is paramount. This recapture opens lines for your king while developing attack vectors. Unleashing the queen aims to disrupt white's kingside pawn structure and challenge control of the central squares. Preparing to activate the rook on the f-file, aiming to pressure the weakened kingside pawn structure. Sacrificing the bishop here aims to disrupt white's pawn structure and create open lines for retaliation. Reclaiming the center with the queen opens lines and challenges black's kingside pawn structure, aiming to exploit any lingering weaknesses. Reclaiming the central square with the knight initiates a dynamic push to open lines, seeking an advantage on the king's flank. Opening the h-file creates immediate threats to the black king, forcing a defensive reaction and potentially creating imbalances. Opening the H-file with this capture transforms the kingside pawn structure into a critical weakness. Solidifying the queenside structure, this advance aims to restrict black's knight and potentially open the b-file. Unleashing the c-pawn cracks open the kingside, demanding immediate attention to the suddenly exposed white king. Securing the b-file for future pressure, aiming to exploit black's weakened queenside pawns. A bold pawn sacrifice, opening lines to your king in exchange for immediate material. Reclaiming the open file, this rook aims to exploit black's precarious pawn structure and potentially threaten the weakened queenside. Unleashing the bishop from its shell, this move aims to pry open the kingside further and create threats against the enemy king. Displacing the monarch into a more exposed central position after such pawn ruptures invites immediate tactical scrutiny, potentially compromising safety. Activating the rook along the open c-file now creates a powerful battery with the bishop, putting immediate pressure on white's central structure. Initiating a centralizing repositioning for the knight, aiming to bolster the kingside defense and potentially exploit weaknesses. This move bravely challenges white's central control, aiming to dismantle their pawn structure and activate black's rooks on open lines. Solidifying the center allows for better piece development and potential pawn advances. Boldly contesting the open file, black injects immediate tension and prepares to disrupt white's kingside defenses. Consolidating its central presence, the rook now contests the open file, aiming to disrupt black's ambitious queenside play. Securing the king's breathing room is paramount, anticipating white's potential kingside storm by creating an escape route. Unleashing a potent check, white pierces black's defenses and dictates the immediate rhythm of the exchange. Hoping to finally dislodge that pesky knight from the vital 7th rank, but it might just open new avenues for white's kingside attack. Challenging the black king's safety by opening attacking avenues is the priority here. Reasserting pressure on the d-file, this knight repositions to support the pawn chain and prepare for queenside operations. Clearing the board simplifies, forcing a race where the isolated king might become a liability. The king's new central position after the exchange offers a surprising amount of active play amidst the remaining pawn structure. Asserting queenside presence with the rook now aims to disrupt black's pawn structure. Re-establishing the bishop's presence on the queenside offers some counterplay, though the overall pawn structure remains a significant challenge. Seizing the open files and activating the knight aims to exploit black's exposed king and central pawn weaknesses. Securing the d-file is paramount now, aiming to disrupt white's central dominance and potentially create counterplay on the open files. Focusing the knight on c3 strengthens the central pawn chain and prepares for potential queenside expansion. Seeking to disrupt white's rook and create passed pawn opportunities on the queenside. Retreating the rook here is a passive decision, allowing black's pieces to consolidate and press on the queenside. Re-establishing the rook's presence on the d-file aims to counter white's pressure and coordinate pieces for the endgame. Exchanging the rooks here simplifies into a favorable endgame for white, capitalizing on black's exposed king. A bold choice, sacrificing positional solidity for active counterplay by challenging white's central pawn structure. Exchanges this knight for a pawn, opening lines, but sacrificing outpost potential. Sacrificing the rook to break open lines for your remaining pieces seems risky given the king's exposed position, but it might ignite counterplay. Capturing the pawn with the knight exploits black's weakened pawn structure and opens up decisive attacking lines. Exposing the monarch to the open files, a daring gamble. Activating the monarch now unlocks central squares and prepares for potential king hunts or defensive reorganization. Reclaiming the passed pawn's mobility is paramount, preparing for its advance. A bold advance, embracing the exposed kingside and forcing a crucial king repositioning. Repositioning the rook to the vital c4 square prepares to contest the open c-file and potentially infiltrate white's territory. Invading the 7th rank opens up potential pawn captures, but it might leave your king exposed to further counterplay. Shifting focus to a more active bishop placement, aiming to pressure white's weakened queenside pawn structure. Instantly securing open lines for the rooks, this pawn push aggressively challenges black's cramped position. Desperate attempts to complicate a lost position by opening lines that only aid the opponent's rook. Removing the passed pawn creates a clear path for the white king to become active in the endgame.